to fully understand all the drama unfolding right now in Kenya, in our politics, one has to understand the spiritual. But how do you explain the spiritual to somebody who does not even want to acknowledge the spiritual exists? I will try my best. I will keep it simple, easy to understand, grade 2 stuff. Okay? Now, President William Samoei Ruto in recent days has lost it. He has gotten enraged. He has been annoyed. Has been a very angry man. Nyinyi wa Kenya mmefika rais kwa koo. In fact, we are now seeing in mainstream media some very strange words you'd not expect to see in screaming headlines. You would not expect to hear in primetime news. Pepo chafu, a filthy spirit, spirit of rejection, spirit of opposing. Those are the phrases in our primetime news now. And this is not normal, is it? In other words, whether you like it or not, very spiritual words have burst into mainstream media. Hey. Now, I believe it is important to understand why Ruto has reached where he has reached. Okay? He has been bombarded by criticism from every corner. Kenyans are fed up with his government. And one thing that he has either ignored or failed to understand is that humans are emotional beings. And once somebody is fed up with you, there is nothing you can do that is right by them. Isn't that true? That is exactly where we have reached as a country. Something else he has ignored or failed to see is that Kenya is a constitutional democracy. We have a constitution. And that 2010 constitution allows the public to question the government in power. Allows the public, the sovereign, those who hold all the power, according to the constitution, it allows them to question the presidency, okay, and the president. And according to that document, there are no limits. I am sure by now you see how we are bang in the middle of a perfect storm. Because we have powerful people who are in power, who are going in one direction, and the people that they're governing are going in the opposite direction. How will that work out? Perfect storm. That is Kenya for you. A very warm welcome to my supercharged show today, where I promise you we're going to go to places that no media outlet has ever gone near, okay, and even no social media handle has ever really interrogated. Oh yes, we're going to go to some places, some of them very scary, and so I strongly suggest that you brace yourselves, because I'm going to try my best to say it as it is, without mincing any words. Now, something changed, and indeed something very major changed, when the Catholic bishops came out and hit out at the government. Because look at what has followed. Something very major changed. But there was something else here that is worth noting. The timing. Allow me to remind you that the Catholic bishops came out after the elections in the United States of America. Also, allow me to remind you of something else. This one is very scary. That has happened here. This story actually started before the 2022 elections. How so? We have seen many spiritual leaders, especially leaders of those churches that supported the campaign of Ruto for the presidency. We have seen those leaving the planet forever. There have been deaths of pastors, prophets, men of God who supported the Ruto campaign. And it has reached a point, indeed it reached a point a long time ago, where coincidence has to be ruled out. We shall go very deep in trying to solve that mystery, because we have somebody from the church who predicted deaths. And it would appear that they have come to pass. Why? We're going to dig very deeply into that and try and come out with some answers. But very quickly before we proceed, please allow me to remind you about our regular sponsors on this channel, LemFi. Now, LemFi is an app for sending money to your loved ones. And you know, this is a season when a lot of that will be happening. It is very easy to use. It has so many advantages. And also, if you use my code, KUMEKACHA, you can see it on your screens right now, you will be able to get a cashback reward for your very first transaction. Also, allow me to introduce you to our other sponsors for today. And this is prime land for sale in Nakuru, for the sake of those Kenyans who have been away from home for too long. These days, Nakuru is not a town. Nakuru is a beautiful city. One of the most beautiful cities in the country called Kenya. Now, this particular plot, about an eighth, is behind the Ebony area. Now, those familiar with Nakuru will immediately know that this is a very busy, prime area for commercial development. And the owner, who is a member of this channel, wants only 6 million for it. Slightly negotiable. Now, in my opinion, that is a bargain. That's a very good price. And the fact that they are saying it is slightly negotiable is bound to give the new owner an even greater deal. And there are many things you can do with this plot. You can even put up residential flats, apartments, for the fast growing Nakuru population. I'm not an expert, but that would not be a bad investment. Now, you can see a number on your screens right now, 0728 852 777. For those of us who are interested, please call that number right away to avoid disappointment. In case you have some property which you're selling, kindly use the email address you see on your screens right now. Contact me and we'll see how we can assist you, because so many people have gotten success on this channel selling their property. Right, let's get on with it. Now, history tells us that when church comes into confrontation with the state, who is always the winner? It is always the church. Time and time again in history, we have seen it unfold exactly like that. Okay? And maybe, while we're still here, let me give you a quick example from recent history from a neighboring country. When dictator Idi Amin Dada was president of neighboring Uganda, they reached a point when one of his harshest critics was the church, led by a man called Archbishop Janani Jakalia Lowum. And it all climaxed in the final confrontation on the 16th of February 1977. That is when Bishop Lowum and others were arrested. And shortly after that, Amin held a public meeting where he paraded Lowum and others and accused the bishop of working with the then former president in exile, Milton Obote. And President Idi Amin went even as far as claiming that Lowum was planning a coup against his government. That's the last time Lowum was seen alive. Amin and his government were then fully in charge, fully in control. Nothing could touch them. But barely 2 years later, Amin was out of power and he was fleeing the country on a chopper. It was the end of his regime. Barely 2 years after this dramatic confrontation. Public confrontation. Okay? Fast forward to the present in Kenya. What has happened in the country? Shortly after the Catholic bishops came out and fired their barbs at the William Samoei Ruto regime, what has happened in Kenya? Nothing has gone right for Ruto. Nothing. Yes, many things were going wrong before, but after the bishop spoke, things have gotten worse. And the culmination of all this is what we have seen recently. The president expressing his anger and frustration openly in public and talking about a spirit in Kenya that opposes everything, a spirit of rejection, and even going as far as saying that a lot of Kenyans who are opposing the building of the airport, his words, have not even gone to the airport one day. They have never stepped inside the airport, ever, since they were born. Majority of those opposing the building of the airport, according to Ruto. Is it that this regime does not realize that Kenyans are not against the building of the airport, but they are against how that airport is going to be built? Has it ever crossed the mind of the president and his handlers and this government that that is the case? Has it ever crossed the mind of this government that those people, poverty-stricken Kenyans, Kenyans who are less fortunate than a small minority, who have never set foot to the airport, have never had any reason to set foot at the airport, are voters? Has it crossed their minds that those people are the voters? The sovereign, the people who have employed this government, the employers? Has it ever crossed their mind? And therefore, would it be in order for me to say that this government must be very confused, very mixed up, not knowing what they are doing, not understanding anything? Okay? Because when you cannot acknowledge your employer, when you want to degrade your employer, they have never stepped into an airport in their lives, then you know there is a problem. Because when you went out seeking for votes, when you went out begging for people to vote for you, you did not specify that you wanted only the people who knew what the inside of an airport looks like to vote for you. You didn't specify that. But now that you're in power, wielding all the power, you are comfortable lecturing your employer. There is something very wrong here. I think you'll agree with me on that one. But now, let us dive into the spiritual, because this video, as I promised at the beginning, is about the spiritual. It is very important for me to make it very clear that I do not have the authority to criticize, to bring down, to judge servants of God. Okay? And you know we live in very dangerous times where it is not very easy to be able to distinguish between genuine servants of God and wolves in sheep's clothing. It is very difficult. As predicted in the Bible, we were told very clearly that in the end times, many will be fooled, many will be deceived. Indeed, we're in the age of deception. And therefore, what I'm going to do is to give you the facts, and then you make up your mind on your own. Don't worry, I will give you enough facts to work with. And let us start with a very instructive quote that was given even before the 2022 general elections by a theology lecturer at the Pan-African Christian University, Dr. Cornelius Indanga. What did he say? He warned men and women of God against spiritual indulgence with pretentious politicians. I'm quoting him word for word. With pretentious politicians whose worldly gifts and donations could have spiritual ties to witchcraft and sacrifices. To simplify what he was saying, he was warning churches against receiving money from politicians whose motives are not to build the church, whose motives are something else, which he calls pretentious. In fact, he calls the politicians pretentious politicians. He warned against receiving gifts from these people. And he further warned that the source of these gifts is important. How was it obtained? Could it have ties with witchcraft and sacrifices? That is what he warned. Now, I think we all know that everything we do in this world has consequences. Everything servants of God do in this world have consequences. You see, Almighty God can never be mocked. Never ever. We have lost too many servants of God. And many of these servants of God, not all of them, many of them are very respected. Many of them had ministries whose fruits you could see. Some of these churches had made a real impact in society, giving to the poor, rehabilitating even violent criminals, and being there to hold their hands as they completely turn around their lives from crime and evil to good deeds. In other words, the good fruits of some of these churches could clearly be seen. Still, they lost their leaders, some of them from short illnesses, some of them even more dramatic, because there was a particular servant of God who shortly after receiving a gift of a brand new car and 500,000 Kenya shillings just suddenly collapsed and died shortly after receiving that gift. Can we say all this is coincidence? Can we? You make a decision for yourself. And this is what has led some people to believe that the sudden turnaround in a lot of these churches, from supporting the Ruto regime, from telling us that Ruto is chosen by Almighty God to lead Kenya, the sudden turnaround to being very harsh critics of the same government they say they prayed into power. Some are telling us that these servants of God are trying to redeem themselves before it is too late for them. I'm sure you know what I mean. In simple terms, they are trying to avoid judgment by repenting, changing the initial direction they were going in, and now telling us they were wrong. Let us not forget that even if you do not say it in as many words, it takes a lot of courage for somebody to do that. It takes any human, even somebody who's just an ordinary person, to come out and say in public words that suggest they were wrong yesterday. saying the very opposite of what they were saying yesterday. And to make matters worse, what they were telling us yesterday had a huge impact in the country, because it enabled somebody to rise to the presidency. And now we are seeing the fruits of that presidency, which is affecting everybody, including them and their congregations, in a very negative way. Okay? And then, super fascinating, the same government, the same individuals who were very happy with the church indulging in politics and saying that they're the ones who should be elected because of 1, 2, 3, because they're born again, because they're Christians, etc., etc. These politicians had no problem then with the church getting involved in politics. But now that the same church comes out and criticizes them, they are now saying churches must stay out of politics. A very clear contradiction. Now, I believe it is important for us to understand where we are as a country, spiritually, amid all this drama that is unfolding. There was a prophet called Prophet Jeremiah. Okay? And before the Israelites went into captivity, into slavery in Babylon, as judgment from Almighty God, Prophet Jeremiah exposed what was happening. And in my opinion, one of the most shocking revelations, exposure, was that some of the children of Israel were involved in the sacrifice of children. A very evil, devilish. In other words, like many times before and many times after, we had a scenario where there was exposure, very shocking things came into light, and then quickly or shortly after that came very terrible judgment. Now, it would seem that the nation called Kenya, I'm sure you have realized there's a lot of exposure. There are a lot of things coming out, being exposed, that we didn't know. And in fact, mambo bado. But the nation called Kenya has reached that point where shortly after this exposure, culminating in the most sensational exposures, some of which some of us will hear and say, no, that can't be true. I'm sure that is not true. No, it cannot be true. Culminating in that, what is coming very soon is terrible judgment. Almighty God, remember mercy for the nation called Kenya. Now we're in the season of gifting Chris Kumekucha. A very warm thank you to those who have already responded, and a very warm thank you to those who are still on the way to respond. And once again, I need to emphasize, for those of us who do not understand, it is okay. There's no problem. Just ignore this message. But for those of us who understand, the information you see on your screens right now will be helpful. And thank you so much for your contribution to the work which I do on this channel, which I believe is no accident, is not my own work, all for a better Kenya. Until next time, this is Chris Kumekucha.